Minecraft's got many mechanics that makes the survival mode what it is today. If your goal is to stay alive, which I feel like is the case for most people, you wouldn't want to end up like... Then one of the most important mechanics would have to be the food and hunger system. On the right side of your hotbar, you'll have 20 hunger points that gradually go down as you do certain actions. If it gets to 17, you won't be able to heal naturally, if it gets to 6, you won't be able to run, and once it reaches 0, you'll start to die. So it's pretty important to actually be eating food, and luckily Minecraft provides a ton of different options as to what to eat. However, with so much food in the game, some are bound to be worse than others, so today I thought it'd be fun to rank all of the food in Minecraft from the worst to the best. Now how exactly am I going to be constructing this list? Technically, if you have unlimited access to every food source in the game, then it is possible to mathematically prove which are the best to eat. But that's boring, I don't want to be a nerd. Oh, look at me, I can do math. More importantly though, I feel like that doesn't completely capture all the factors that need to be considered. Most of the time you aren't going to have unlimited access to all the food sources, so how practical a food is to get will be a major factor in this list on top of how good it is at actually filling the hunger and saturation meter. In addition to that, I thought it would be fun to also consider any other uses a food item has outside of eating, which definitely made this list significantly more complicated. As for what's considered for this list, Minecraft luckily makes that pretty clear with its balanced diet advancement, which requires you to eat one of everything, so whatever counts for that will count for this list. And also I'm throwing on cake because that isn't a requirement for some reason. Now I also have a serious problem of yapping too much. I've been trying to make shorter videos so I have more time to work on my 200k special ranking every 2D Mario level, and I have been unsuccessful with my task. So the goal this time around is to actually do that, so this video may have a slightly faster pace than I normally have for these videos. But anyways, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and let's jump right in. So starting off, we have our F tier, the food sources that are essentially useless to ever make or eat. Starting off, we have the most expected last place ever, 41, the poisonous potato. As the name suggests, eating this thing poisons you. Granted, it only has an 80% chance to poison you, but why even take the risk? It only fills the hunger meter by 2 hunger points and has an effectiveness of 3.2. The hunger system in Minecraft is kind of complicated because there's a second hidden bar known as saturation, which controls how long until your hunger meter actually goes down, and the amount of saturation you get from each food is different. So the effectiveness value takes both hunger and saturation points into consideration. With all that being said, yeah, this is pretty bad. This can't even be made into a better food source. It's literally just in the game to be a minor inconvenience when harvesting potatoes. Honestly though, I don't mind that. It is kind of funny to have an item that's essentially entirely useless. Heck, that's why Mojang even based their last April Fool's update after the item, because it's funny to imagine this ever actually getting a use. But also they may need to stop doing these because now I just get sad. I want to swing around like Spider-Man. But yeah, for being a purposefully useless item, the poisonous potato takes last place. 40, the tropical fish. This is the least effective food source in the entire game, only providing 1 hunger point and having an effectiveness rating of 1.2. That alone would be enough to make this bad, but it's also a minor annoyance just like the poisonous potato as it appears while fishing, taking away from much better food sources. Now I know what some of you may be saying, can't these be used to breed axolotls? No. To breed them, you need to use a bucket of tropical fish. The food item you get after killing the fish is entirely useless in this department. So yeah, the item basically has no reason to ever want it. You can't even tame cats with it. 39, the cookie. As much as I may love cookies, they are sadly quite useless in Minecraft. They only give 2 hunger points with an effectiveness rating of 2.4, so not something ever worth making. In order to craft it, it takes wheat, which is better used for bread, and cocoa beans, which is better used for brown dye. Outside of eating them, cookies have the incredibly useful ability to kill parrots. The only upside I can think of this is that when you craft them, you do get 8 at once, but I still don't think it's really worth it. 38, rabbit stew. This is bad for a very different reason from the others in F tier. Not only does this actually provide a lot more hunger points, it actually provides the most of any food source in the game. Asterisk. It restores a total of 10 hunger points with an effectiveness of 22. So why on earth is it in F tier? Well, for starters, you can't stack it, which is a massive downside as you'll need to eat a lot of food as you play, even with how effective this is. Now you can stack the ingredients, but to make this you need 5 different items, so to hold a stack of rabbit stew, it essentially takes up 5 inventory slots, 6 if you count the item itself once it's crafted. And also, why don't we take a look at those ingredients? It takes a bowl of course, but also cooked rabbit, a baked potato, a carrot, and a mushroom. That is a lot of other food items, and as it turns out, if you eat them all separately, excluding the bowl and mushroom, you get 13 hunger points and 28.6 effectiveness. That means it is a complete waste of resources to ever make rabbit stew because you're getting less out of it for more items. So yeah, I honestly don't even know why they bothered adding this. 37, beetroot soup. For our final F tier, this is a very similar problem to our last one in that it doesn't stack. Luckily though, it does at least make sense to make as it provides 6 hunger points with 13.2 effectiveness, the exact same amount you'd get from eating 6 beetroots. Now that does bring up the question of why even bother making this if it is the exact same, but at the very least you're not making it at a loss. Now it's time to move on to C tier, the stuff you probably won't eat, but they're significantly more useful. Starting off, we have 36 Mushroom Stew. This has the exact same hunger and effectiveness as beetroot soup, along with also having the problem of being unable to stack. What I think puts it up into C tier though is the fact that it's a lot more convenient. It only takes 2 mushrooms, one of each color to craft, and you can easily just stumble across those while caving. If you're lucky enough to have a mushroom, you can also milk it. Is it called milking if it's from mushrooms? Oh, who cares? You can do this infinitely, so it can be a fairly solid food source, but pretty much only if you have a mushroom. 35 Rotten Flesh. This is dropped by zombies, so most players will have an absurdly large amount of this. Unless you really suck at fighting zombies. Embarrassing! Now this is not something I recommend eating. It gives a very weak amount of hunger points with a total of 4 and an effectiveness score of only 4.8. That's not even considering the fact that eating this will give you the hunger effect about 80% of the time. While it can be fun to gamble by eating this, I certainly wouldn't recommend it. Now with all that being said, why is it this high up? Well, it's got 2 solid uses outside of food. First off, it will heal wolves 100% of their health, which will be extra nice with 1.20.5's new dog breeds. Secondly, you can also trade rotten flesh to cleric villagers for emeralds. Now this is far from the most efficient trade as it requires 32 rotten flesh, but it is certainly something I've done quite a bit over the course of the game. 34 Raw Chicken. Spoiler alert, most of the other raw food will be in this tier. I know they can be made into cooked variants, which are all much better, but it didn't feel right placing the raw variants very high. For the sake of time as well, we're gonna run through these quite fast. The reason chicken is the worst is simply because eating it has a chance to give you the hunger effect. While that does make it more fun to gamble with, that sadly is a lot less useful. 33 Beetroot. Now this is a crop I've been a hater toward for a long time. Ever since it was added, I've bullied this thing for being easily the worst plantable crop. But after looking at everything, I just want to say, it still sucks. Okay, it's not terrible, but it's not very impressive. It gives a minuscule 1 hunger point with 2.2 effectiveness. This doesn't have the advantage of being cooked into a better version like the potato, so this just kinda sucks. It does have a few small things to consider though. Like rotten flesh, it can be traded to villagers. You're much better off using one of the other crops, but this has the option. Beetroots are also able to breed pigs, so if you somehow don't have access to carrots anywhere, this is good for the job. And on top of all that, it can be crafted into red dye. But I'd say iron farms are much more efficient since the golems always drop more poppies than you'll ever know what to deal with. So yeah, this thing does have some uses, but it's pretty much always overshadowed by something else. 32 Suspicious Stew. This was a very hard one to place. It's got solid stats, giving 6 hunger points and 13.2 effectiveness, but also the problem of not being able to stack. What's interesting about Suspicious Stew though is that it can give the player a potion effect. To craft this, you need to add a flower to the mushroom stew recipe, and depending on the flower, you'll get a different effect. These effects include regen, jump boost, poison, wither, weakness, fire resistance, night vision, blindness, and saturation. Now most of those are not that interesting because they last for like 3 milliseconds, but the last 2 are pretty notable. This is the only way to get the blindness effect, and while that is a negative one, it makes Suspicious Stew a requirement for the How Did We Get Here advancement, which makes the player have every effect on them at once. The saturation effect makes this the best food source in the game stats-wise, making this now give 13 hunger points and an enormous 34.2 effectiveness. While this is still very impractical to carry, since again, it's unstackable, early game this can be a lifesaver. I remember going onto a server once and only being able to survive because I was able to find the mushrooms and dandelions required to make this. Outside of early game and the advancement though, there's really no reason to ever seek this out. You know how I mentioned raw food a second ago? Well now it's time to rapid fire through a lot of them. 31 Raw Rabbit. Of the raw meats, this is easily the least convenient to obtain. Rabbits are far rarer than the other types of mobs here, and what type of psychopath makes a rabbit farm? But you don't understand, I really need jump boost potions. 30 Raw Mutton. This has the lowest hunger and effective score of the bunch, and so does its cooked variation. Sheep are also a mob you generally want to keep alive so you can shear them. 29 Raw Pork Chop and 28 Raw Beef. These are equal in stats, but one comes from pigs and the other from cows. Personally, I'm putting beef on top because having a cow farm is easier than a pig farm since they breed with wheat, and you get leather from it, whereas pigs only drop pork chop. Sure, I guess you could get pork chop and leather from a hoglin, but then you have to deal with them wanting to kill you. Okay, this next one may seem stupid, but 27 The Apple. This is kind of a raw food in my eyes because the main reason you'd want it is so that you can craft a golden apple. But a golden apple is kind of expensive, so why would I put the apple above raw pork chop and beef? Well, first off, the apple just has better stats, giving 4 hunger points and 6.3 effectiveness. Secondly, it's required in making golden apples. For the meats, you can skip the raw step by burning the animal alive. That makes having the raw version less desirable, whereas there's no way to farm golden apples without the apple itself. And third of all, I just like apples. Knife. 26 Spider Eye. This is another mob drop in the same vein as Rotten Flesh, but instead of the zombie, this is of course dropped by witches. They have similarly low stats, giving 2 hunger points with 5.2 effectiveness. They even have a potion effect, but instead of hunger, it's poison. Now the reason I'm placing the Spider Eye up higher is because the secondary uses are pretty solid. It can be crafted into the fermented Spider Eye, which is used to create 4 different potions: harming, slowness, invisibility, and weakness. Of those, weakness is especially valuable as a weakness potion is used to cure zombie villagers. This could give the player easy access to villagers and significant deals in their trades, which in my opinion makes a spider eye more valuable. Still though, considering it's not one you should ever actually eat, it's hard to justify bringing this up much higher. 25. Cooked rabbit. This one I predict to be very controversial because I genuinely had no clue where to place this. It's a solid food stats wise, giving 5 hunger points with 11 effectiveness, but like I said with raw rabbit, this isn't a meat you'll ever be going for. It can certainly be good early game if rabbits are somehow the only mob you can see, but outside of that, you should really be eating other meats instead. 24. Sweet berries, and 23. Glow berries. These are back to back for the same reasons. For one, they both give the exact same amount stats wise, a pretty weak 2 hunger points and 2.4 effectiveness. Eating these two is not what they're good for. Instead, they're actually pretty nice decoration blocks. Sweet berries can be placed on the floor to create some small bushes, and glow berries can be hung from ceilings to create really nice looking vines. Each of them also have an additional property. Sweet berries will be able to damage anything that touches them, and glow berries can produce light. Happy one glow thing was able to get it right, looking at you, squid. Personally, of these two, I think glow berries look a bit nicer, but I think both are useful enough in building to place them up here despite their lackluster stats. 22. Cake. This is an absolute classic, but also the most different type of food in the game. Instead of eating it right out of your inventory, you actually place it down like a block and then eat it slice by slice. If you eat all 7 slices, you get 14 hunger points with 16.8 effectiveness. That's somewhat decent, but you do have to consider how expensive and complicated they are to make. Luckily though, due to this being a block you place, I actually really like how it works as decoration. I had used it plenty of times over the years. And then one of my friends will come in and eat a single slice and ruin the entire build, thanks guys. Glowberries might be a more useful building tool, but I decided to place cake higher because of its better food stats. 21. Melon slice. You can plant these just like a pumpkin and of course eat the slices. Now the slices don't give that much with only 2 hunger points and 3.2 effectiveness, but you get several melon slices from each block. Melons also spawn pretty commonly in jungles, which makes them an easily accessible food source if you're exploring that biome. On top of that, melons can be crafted into 2 different things. First is the glistering melon, which is used to make instant health potions. Melon slices can also be made back into melon blocks, which can be pretty helpful in decoration. Add on that melons are extremely easy to automatically farm, and this is a decently acceptable food choice. But now it's time for our B tiers, the ones I think are pretty solid. However, for the most part, these aren't foods you'll be eating, but rather they're high for their extra uses. That's shown off right away with 20, the pufferfish. This is probably the worst food to actually eat in the entire game, as it gives you poison 4, nausea, and hunger. Eating this pretty much just sentences you to automatically taking a lot of damage. There's not even a gambling aspect here, you always get the effects. With that being said, pufferfish are still incredibly useful as they're the main ingredient in water breathing potions. As I'm sure you could guess, this prevents you from drowning so long as the effect is on, which is extremely helpful when raiding ocean monuments, exploring the ocean, mining in underwater caves, and pretty much just any activity where you could drown.
I am under the water.
So while the pufferfish is not a good food to eat by any means, having one of the best potions tied to it is certainly a plus. 19 raw cod and 18 raw salmon. You may be a bit confused as to why these 2 raw foods are so much higher than the meat we saw earlier. Of the raw foods, they actually have the worst stats, giving 2 hunger points and having 2.4 effectiveness. The difference comes in the fact that these 2 raw fish actually have some pretty solid uses outside of being eaten, at least by the player. First of all, they can be used to tame cats, which are not only nice as pets, but also quite helpful as they scare away creepers and phantoms, even being an essential part of most creeper farms. These 2 raw fish can also be fed to dolphins, and if you didn't know, that'll cause a dolphin to lead the player to a nearby ocean structure, whether it be an ocean ruin or a shipwreck. That's obviously very helpful while exploring the sea, so for those 2 reasons, I think these 2 raw fish are the best raw foods in the game. 17. The enchanted golden apple. This one was really hard to place. If you have one, it is a phenomenal food source, giving 4 hunger points with 13.6 effectiveness. On top of that, it also affects the user with regen 2, absorption 4, resistance, and fire resistance for a limited time. This can seriously save your life in a tricky situation. It's especially helpful if you want to fight the warden, for whatever reason. Thing is though, that's if you have one, and this is easily the hardest food to get in the game. It's the only food source that's non-renewable, as you can only get it from structure chests. You used to be able to craft it using gold blocks, which would probably not be worth it to be honest. But yeah, they removed the recipe, so now this is hard to judge. It is really exciting whenever you do get one though, so I think B tier is fair. It's just far too impractical to make it go any higher on the list. 16. Dried kelp. This has pathetically small stats, only giving 1 hunger point and 1.6 effectiveness. Though to make up for that, this lets you eat it twice as fast as everything else. Well anyway, the main reason you'll want this is because it can be used to make the dried kelp block. Now to be honest, this isn't really one I like much decoration wise. Ready for me to ruin this block forever? Because this white line is only 1 pixel big, it's actually off center. Yeah, I can't stand looking at this block anymore. Luckily, dried kelp blocks do have a different use, as they can be used as fuel in furnaces, and a pretty good one at that, as each can smelt 20 items. Now this is a sort of predictive placement, but with the addition of the crafter's next update, this will allow for automatically refueling furnaces. This was technically possible before with bamboo, but they can only smelt a quarter item each. I'm personally going to try using this as a fuel source next update, and if it works as well as I think it will, I think placing dried kelp up here is fair. 15. Honey bottle. I'll be honest, I'm still really bad with everything revolving around bees. I'm definitely going to need to learn soon, because I plan to be using a lot of copper in the near future to make a steam gardens theme build, but regardless, I could still see this being very helpful. The stats stats are somewhat decent, giving 6 hunger points to 7.2 effectiveness, but really it's what these can be turned into that's the highlight. You can make sugar. Using 4 honey bottles together, you can craft a honey block, which can not only be used as decoration, but they're a very valuable redstone component. They work exactly like slime blocks when pushed by a piston, pulling anything attached to them as well. The important difference is that honey blocks can't stick to slime blocks, and vice versa, which is extraordinarily helpful in making larger piston contraptions. Honey also has some more unique properties like slowing people down whether walking on top of them or sliding down their side, so it's safe to say that the honey bottle is very nice for allowing this. 14 chorus fruit. This is well known as the main plant occupying the end dimension. Each of these purple tree things drops several of them, and you can always plant more by plucking the flower. When eaten, this will give 4 hunger points with... Where am I? Yeah, so the chorus fruit has the additional property of teleporting the player like an enderman. This means any block within a 16 block radius. While that may sound like it can be annoying, it's actually quite helpful in a few scenarios. Namely, if you're in the end, you're likely trying to hunt for end cities. If you find one but end up getting attacked by several shulkers, you can actually save yourself by eating a chorus fruit. No matter how high up you get, it'll instantly teleport you back down to the ground since it always puts you on a solid block. That is legitimately a lifesaver, and having this plant be so abundant near end cities is nice too. You can also use chorus fruit to teleport through walls and floors, so if you have a cheater on your server who makes a bedrock house, you can use these to get inside. Finally, it's also just nice to have a food source in the end. Since traveling here will often take you thousands of blocks, it's nice to not have to worry too much about bringing too little food. On top of all these great uses while being eaten, you can also smelt chorus fruit to make pop chorus fruit, which is an ingredient needed to craft all the purple blocks. All of these look great, and I'm especially a big fan of the end rod. So despite the stats not being the best, this has plenty of uses to justify its high placing. 13 pumpkin pie. Okay, this one is probably just a personal cheat, but I don't care, I love pumpkin pie. It's got pretty decent stats, giving 8 hunger points with 12.8 effectiveness. In order to get the food, you have to craft it using sugar, eggs, and a pumpkin. This is where I really enjoy the item, as all 3 of those can be automatically farmed. Setting up a pumpkin pie factory is something I used to do a lot in the game, and it's honestly something I'm considering doing again with the crafters, making it even more automatic. It's just a really fun project in my opinion, and I know I try to keep these lists to mostly practical things, but it's also my video, I don't care. Plus the pumpkin pie definitely is a good food source, just not the best, which is what puts it in B tier. But now it's time for our A tiers. Funnily enough, the video is going to go by a lot faster now because the explanations for these are almost all very obvious. They have good food stats and are easy to get. 12 cooked mutton. It's got a pretty good score of 6 hunger points and 15.6 effectiveness, and it's easily farmable as it's dropped by sheep, one of the most common mobs in the game. Now the reason this is lower than some of the other cooked food is the same reason raw mutton was lower. Generally, if you have a sheep farm, you want it for wool rather than food. So it's better to keep the sheep alive while you might as well just murder those other losers. 11 cooked cod. While having a little bit worse stats than mutton with 5 hunger points and 11 effectiveness, this has the advantage of being very abundant. Not only can you get it from fishing, you can easily find a billion fish by just looking underwater. But you know what would be even better? 10 cooked salmon. This is the best of both worlds, having the same stats as mutton with the upsides of cod. I'm quite surprised there's such a big difference between these two. I knew that salmon was a bit better, but I was not expecting this much. 9 potato and 8 carrot. These are the two in A tier that will need the most explanation, but I think most people will more than understand them. Their stats are relatively low, with potato having 1 hunger point and 1.6 effectiveness, whereas the carrot has 3 hunger points and 6.6 effectiveness, but it's what these foods can be used for that's important. They can both easily be traded to villagers for emeralds. Speaking of villagers, these can also be used to make automatic villager breeders, which are incredibly helpful machines. And on top of all of that, they're easily farmable, both automatically and manually. While their basic forms may not be great to eat, potatoes can be baked into baked potatoes, and carrots can be turned into golden carrots. So I think it's fair to say that these are some of the best foods in the game. I know many people who live purely off of them. Oh, and the reason the carrot is above the potato is because it can be used to make a carrot on a stick, the best item in the entire game. 7 bread and 6 baked potatoes. These both have the exact same stats with 5 hunger points and 11 effectiveness. They're both also pretty similar to obtain, as you need to make them out of crops. Bread requires 3 wheat, and baked potatoes require you to smelt a potato. They're also both automatically farmable due to this. Now you could go either way on which is better here. Some people may prefer bread since you use less fuel, whereas others may prefer baked potatoes since you don't have to wait for as many crops to grow. Personally, I'm on the potato side, but bread also has its time to shine. It's especially great early game since you can rob villages for hay bales and make a ton of loaves right at the start. But yeah, I think either way you lean, they're both pretty great. But now it's time for our S tiers, the top 5 that I think are the best of the best. First is probably the biggest outlier of the bunch with 5 the golden apple. Unlike its enchanted counterpart, we can actually craft this one. Its recipe is also pretty reasonable considering gold farms exist. As for stats, it has the same as the enchanted golden apple, though the effects here are slightly weaker with just regen 2 and absorption. That still makes this very helpful to eat in dangerous situations though. What really brings it up this high is the fact that it can be used in villager curing. I mentioned this back at the spider eye segment, but curing villagers is an important part of getting both trades and good discounts. So I think for its far more practical method of obtaining it, the normal golden apple gets to make it into S tier. 4. Cooked chicken. While its stats are actually a bit lower than mutton at 6 hunger points and 13.2 effectiveness, this is the significant advantage of being fully automatic. Breeding animals is one of the few things that can't be automated, so player input is needed for a sheep farm. That is however not the case with chickens. Since they can lay eggs, we can have those go into a dispenser and automatically hatch the egg. Then once the chicken grows up, we can have the machine automatically pour lava on their head to cook and kill it. This is a very solid option for a food source, and I would entirely understand why someone would go for this as their main source of food. Add on the chickens are just a common mob in general, and I think this easily deserves S tier. 3. Cooked pork chop, and 2. Steak. Coming from pigs and cows respectively, these both have the absurdly high stats of 8 hunger points and 20.8 effectiveness. While you can't automate cow and pig farms, I think the sheer stat difference does allow them to go above chicken. It's also not that much of a bother to set up a pig or cow farm. These are also two of the game's most common mobs, so the food is helpful to have at any point in the game. But for my number one choice, we have golden carrots. This is definitely the food I use the most in the game. It has crazy high stats of 6 hunger points and 20.4 effectiveness. Now that's great and all, but what about obtaining it? Well, you actually have a surprising amount of options here. You could just automatically farm the materials needed to craft it with a golden carrot farm, or you could do what I do and use villager trades. Farmer villagers will give you 3 golden carrots for 3 emeralds, which is pretty cheap if you have a basic iron farm. You could trade the iron you get to a different villager and essentially make it so every iron golem equals a golden carrot. Using this method, I never run out of food, and it's why, in my opinion, the golden carrot is easily my favorite food in Minecraft. Oh wait, you can also make night vision potions. Anyways, that's it for this video. Do you love eating Wither's suspicious stew and hate me for dissing it? Let me know in the comments. Well, I don't think I managed to make this video much shorter than my other ones. Hopefully it was still enjoyable. I know this is a bit of a sillier ranking, but I honestly had a lot of fun putting this list together, especially with all the different factors. But anyways, dry bones for Smash, and I'll see you guys next time.